You know, this whole script seems kinda mage-centric. Well, yeah, because mage players are the second biggest cowards I know. Wait, then who's the biggest? Hidden Run Rangers. Yeah, okay, I'm with you on that one. So, for everyone else not afraid to take a few hits, or just too lazy to move, let's go over how surviving actually works. Or if you're not interested in the nitty gritty, just skip to the timestamp for example situations where people are most concerned about being too squishy to face tank. Let's start with element resistance. So the most basic advice you get when you first start AoEing is element your suit. You'll take less damage. Pretty straightforward. If you don't know what element to make your suit, just fly to the mob you'll be grinding at, and check the element icons under the HP bar when you click on one. The element with the blue up arrow is the one you need to have on your suit, and whenever you're ready to move on to the next mob, you can remove it at any armor NPC for 1 mil and re-upgrade with the element you need. The part that's less clear is how much those element upgrades are actually helping you, which it turns out not every plus is the same despite what the character details window says, as you can see on this chart. That being said though, the element resistances from Shield Awake and Clockwork's armor actually do reduce your damage taken by 1% for every 1% of resistance you get from them. So having all 4 parts of the Clockwork's armor is a straight up 34% damage reduction. Well, almost. But nothing worth addressing. Yeah. Last thing before we move to block and parry, element defense stones give defense, not element resistance. So we'll talk more about them in the defense section. Block and parry, everyone's favorite stats, for good reason. Blocking a hit reduces the damage by 80%, and if you have max block, you only take 1 or 2 unblocked hits for every 20 on average. Now that being said, it's not so good that you need to add dex to get it. At least not until 150 when you start leveling in Kylun. For anything below level 120, element resistances from Clockwork's armor is already more than enough defensively. Besides the obvious exception of Glaphans, but I'll go over them specifically later. Of course, if you're a blade or a ranger, you should always be adding dex since that's where you get your damage. I like how you put those dex values up there and then tell everyone to not use it. Moving on to parry, for the most part, this is a stat you have, but don't actually plan around having a certain amount of. Blades and Rangers, and later Harlequins, will naturally have a lot because they're adding dex for damage. Other classes, including Elementers, shouldn't be concerning themselves with it until the 150s when you move to Kylun, since the mobs there have a lot more attack than anything else before them. Once you're in Kylun, though, you're still mostly adding dex for block, and parry just kind of comes along for the ride. That being said, if you're using the 242 dex recommended for mages, you're taking around 31% less damage than if you didn't have any dex, which is pretty significant. Parry, as you can see here, doesn't reduce hit rate 1-to-1. The more parry you have, the smaller the effect it has on the attacker's hit rate, which is what makes hit rate reductions like Sandstorm so powerful, since it subtracts 40% hit rate after parry calculations. So if you're at 152 parry against Hellhounds, for example, Sandstorm is worth 1180 dex. Defense follows a similar logic and curve. Damage taken is based on a ratio of the mob's attack and your defense. The more defense you have, the less effective each point of defense becomes. Like parry, this isn't something you build around, and it's just something you get from using better armor sets. The most misleading part about defense, though, is your character details window assumes your armor pieces give the defense they claim to give, which is very untrue. Your armor gives 1/4 of the defense written on it. Since almost all of your defense on the character details windows from armor anyway, you can just divide your defense by 4 and get very close to what your real defense is. Not a lot of non-armor sources of flat defense anyway. Not a lot of percent defense either, just protect, defense upcut, and maybe protection if you're not using a shield. Those are all straightforward. Less so is the element defense zones. They give percent element defense, which is actually just regular defense, but it's a different set so it multiplies with your other percent defense effects like protect. The effect of the element defense stone scales with the element upgrade level of your suit, giving 22% defense at +1 and 29% at +10. Yeah, don't ask why they would make that like that. Okay, that's it for all the misleading stats, so let's talk about something more simple. Let's talk about healing. First, we have food, which is probably overlooked quite often as a source of healing. If you're leveling in Darkon 3 and can buy some of these higher end foods, they're really strong. Like, spamming Groton when you're leveling at mush poise or trees is about the same amount of healing as your Ringmaster is doing. Once you're dropping your own Groton, you'll get more than you can use, so don't be shy about using them. Pills are on a separate cooldown, so technically you can spam them alongside the food, but they're better used as big burst healing when you need it, so I didn't include them here. And let's be real, red pills cover more than 100% of your HP until like mid-Asria, so you're generally not getting full value out of them anyway. Obviously, both of those things don't scale all that well compared to the damage you take, not to mention how much stronger your RM's healing becomes with 105 gear. To get an idea of how big of a spike that is, take a look at this chart. When you're using a flurry set in Hyperstick, you're going to be around 45 to 50% casting speed, which means your healing per second is 7 to 15% more than the heal amount. With 105 gear, not only do you get the percent healing bonus from your set and stick, you'll also break the 70% casting speed mark, so your healing per second is 36% higher than the heal amount. If you roll a good amount of percent healing as a weapon bonus, you've just about doubled your healing rate. Around the same time, you're probably getting your bloody weapon, which is lifesteal. Lifesteal from bloody weapons is comparable to healing from food. Because of the way Herd reduces your damage, pulling more and more mobs means lifesteal healing becomes weaker relative to incoming damage. So it's really nothing special on bloody weapons. But if you get it as an ultimate bonus on a coral weapon, that's where it really shines. And finally, we have a thing that's different for every class. So for like half the classes, this really just means stuns. But we should really define how good stuns are objectively. To do that, the first thing you need to know is mobs attack once every 3 seconds, which means if you stun them for say 2 seconds, that's basically a miss once you factor in their attack animation times. We don't really have control over our stuns though. They're more just something that happens naturally while we're spamming our AoEs. So instead, it's best we think in terms of what percent of the mobs are stunned at any given time and treat it as a reduction in their hit rate. And finally make sense of it all by converting it to overall damage reduced, which I'll call damage taken. Let's go over an example of what stun coverage looks like to make it a little easier to understand. Merkabah Hands of Russia has a tick rate of 0.75 seconds, and Stonehand has a stun rate of 12% and stuns for 5 seconds, which gives us 6 to 7 chances to stun in any given 5-second window. 6 to 7 chances to stun at 12% means there's a 43% chance a mob will never be stunned in that 5-second window. Or to put it another way, 57% of mobs will be stunned at any given point in the AoE. Just ignoring a few things like the start of the AoE and overlaps in Merkabah timers. For simplicity's sake, 57% stun coverage, which we can roughly translate to the mobs having 43% hit rate on us, is equal to having about this much parry, according to where you happen to be leveling at, and ignoring the block gains from having that much dex. And then here's every other kind of skill that helps and the amount they reduce your effective damage taken by. Not sorted in any particular order, but mostly grouped by class. Some oddities here, like Barrier of Life, is really only used at the start of the AoE. Knights should almost never be using Guard, except to survive when a pull gets dicey for one reason or another. Gravity Well and Windfield. I've seen a lot of people just write these two off as hidden run skills, but they're actually super strong tank skills. Slowing down the mobs as they approach gives you time to stun and debuff, as well as teasing their attack timer at the start of the pull, so the initial burst of damage you would normally take is spread out a bit more, making it healable and unlikely to kill you, even if your RM doesn't Barrier of Life. The key takeaway from all this is tanking isn't just about max block, or max parry, or full star, or whatever other BS people are telling you have to survive. Life doesn't give you any XP for sitting there getting hit by the mobs. Understanding what makes you tanky enough to survive gives you room to do more damage, which is what actually makes you level faster. Of course, you could just be mega lazy and just brainlessly take all the fence stats and survive everything, but at that point, maybe it's time to consider playing 1v1 instead. Alright, that's it for all the individual pieces, which are nice, but don't really mean much on their own, so let's go over some actual situations that people usually think are impossible to survive. Let's start with a level 65 Elementer. Hey, this isn't a hidden run guide. Yeah, I know. That's why we're using a clean clockwork set with just element upgrade and Panzerus, and an FS with flurry and hyperstick, leveling at Boos. The boots and gloves might not be affordable right away, but it's probably fine. Go on. With that gear, you would take 850 per hit, which is then reduced by the attack debuff on Earthquake and element resistances, down to around 320 or so. The other stuff on this list won't affect the numbers you see, but are still working to bring down the average DPS of the mobs. Each of these effects multiplicatively reduce the overall damage you're taking, so we'll just multiply everything by every other thing, and we find the expected value of a mob's auto attack on you is 240 damage. Since we know mobs attack once every 3 seconds, we divide by 3 to get their individual damage per second. Finally, we bring in our healing per second and divide it by our damage taken per second per mob to find how many mobs we can pull, and we get that we're basically invincible against 12 mobs with just our assist healing, which is fine, but if we spam Star Candy, we can make that pull 50% bigger, and 18 mobs is about the upper limit of the pull sizes here given their spawn. And that's what you can do at 65. You can easily pull more in a level or two if there's enough mobs around. Or stop spamming candy. Oh, and this is before they get Sandstorm at 70, which will make them like 30% tankier. Okay, that's cool, but wouldn't this struggle at Glaphans since the Clockwork's armor doesn't have wind resistance? Well, let's see. What's a good level to be at Glaphans? 95? Would be there by like 92 if you really wanted to. But I'll say 94 at the normal Glaphans. So with 30 levels, I think it's safe to assume the Clockwork set has been upgraded somewhat. But since we did Elemental last time, let's assume it's a Psykeeper this time, which means no Earthquake and no Sandstorm. But we'll assume we have a 10% block Ancient Shield. Heals and buff will be a good bit better from both having more int and being able to use Heal Rain, which gives us these changes in damage. A lot less element resistance, which isn't really made up for with a block shield and stun coverage, and it shows in the results where, even with food, we can't pull as many as we did at Boos. But again, this is basically when you first arrive at Glaphans when they're at their most difficult. You can gather like 50% more in 5 levels. Not that there's anywhere else you can level at by that point. Now, in theory, you could actually use the Clockwork's armor until 190. The elemental resistances are strong enough to let you do that. As crazy as that sounds. You don't actually want to do that, though. because armor sets at 120, 150, and 180 not only provide sufficient tank stats, but also a lot of extra damage you don't want to miss out on. 120 set can be difficult to find, so it's understandable if you skip that one, but mages specifically will not want to miss out on their 135 sets, which provide a huge damage spike by enabling them to reach the maximum casting speed. If we look at the effects of the 135 set though, there's the glaring lack of actual defense stats, which scares a lot of people. So let's see if that set is actually usable. Again, more levels hopefully means better gear, so I'm going to say you can probably afford to have your set be +8. Veto 2s are cheaper than upgrading your sets, so you should be able to get those. The shield we'll assume is still 10% block. This can be ancient or azure, not a huge difference either way. Because we have a bloody weapon, having a number for our damage matters. 15k I think is a reasonable estimate, especially if you're using an upcut stone. And by this point, hopefully the Ringmaster has their 105 gear for higher casting speed and percent healing bonuses. Which gives us the following adjustments. Key changes here are the higher block rate from using speedos and a higher setup grade. There's more stun coverage because we gained cast speed since level 94 to basically double our cast per second, and of course our healing has gone up, both from the RN's gear and the lifesteal on our bloody wand. You'll take around 2400 on an unblocked hit, but in terms of actual DPS of the pack as a whole, you can definitely survive 20 mobs here, and more if you gravity well properly, but that's a little harder to measure. And to wrap things up, the last hard part is going to small hunter sharpfoots at level 150, which is a 12 level difference most people would look at and think that's too dangerous or you'll kill too slow. The second part is true. It just still works out in your favor because Hunter Sharpfoots give a mountain load more XP than anything in Coral. As for the first part, let's take a look. Gear estimates are on the very low end here, +8 set is a given at this point. I'm not going to assume you have a conch staff or an adept set, but I don't think it's too much to ask for your Ringmaster to have max casting speed, which is trivial with clarity potions. Lipine set and Bloody Staff can't hit max cast speed here. You need to either get an adept set or a conch to make that a possibility. The build is probably the most interesting part here. No, it sounds kind of insane, but at this point you lose around 30% of your damage for an insane increase in tankiness, and you'll find very useful in Kylun given their very high attack values compared to everything else you've leveled at before. Technically, this build was made for people with core weapons, but we make a special exception for Hundurs and use it anyway because their EXP just makes up for it and more. If you don't have a core weapon by level 161, I suggest you stop leveling after unlocking Kryton and just farm wilds or whatever other money-making method you prefer until you have one. There's no benefit to leveling past 166 without it. All of that results in, well, this might be a bit hard to believe. 9,207 damage before we apply any of our defensive tools would be a 3-hit even with all of our stamina. But once we put everything in, you'll really only take around 4,500 unblocked, and the incoming DPS goes all the way down to just 161 per mob. Given our massive healing numbers, it's theoretically possible to tank 77 mobs. Theoretically? Theoretically, because this assumes perfect play in a pool that takes over a minute, every mob is about 5 times more dangerous while you're gathering, and setting up the AoE doesn't happen at instant speed. You need to cast Sandstorm, Lightning Storm, and at least 4 Earthquakes for the pool to reach this level of safety. So, realistically, you're probably only pulling about half this number safely, which is a good stopping point anyway because your damage hits a soft cap at around 30-ish mobs because of herd, unless you have Water Bomb to counteract it. Beyond this point, it only ever gets easier. The next difficult part is probably when you're 167 at Small Canonicus, but that's because they use ranged attacks. And if you really can't handle that, and you can just level at Kyochish for a while, but it's never going to be as difficult as being 12 levels down in suboptimal gear. So, while you figure out how to not die while gathering, I'll see you around.